Good afternoon, guys. Hope everybody's having a decent Thursday, getting some stuff done, enjoying some time or whatever it was. Took a break here over lunch and was just kind of looking to see what was going on and was watching Glenn Beck from yesterday. And Glenn had put up a really good show on prepping. Uh, and definitely, Glenn Beck is one of us, if you will. So, but was watching this and it got me thinking as to, and you know me, looking back at history, and I'm going, okay, how would everybody now have reacted if this was 1929 and not 2022? Now, when we think of the Great Depression, you think of New York City, stockbrokers jumping out of windows, lines of food, the soup kitchens, all that sort of stuff. But that wasn't the whole country. That was what made the newspapers because that's where the newspapers were. But you look at the rest of the country, and I was kind of, thinking about here, where I am, okay, rural America. And, if you look at it, and those of you that live in the area, you know what I'm talking about. West Virginia, Kentucky, East Tennessee is the butt of God knows how many jokes. Just a bunch of hillbillies living up, in the hills, the Hatfields and McCoys, all this sort of stuff, right? You've heard that. You know you have. All right. But so it got me thinking, how did the Great Depression affect the people in the hills, okay, in the mountains? Not so much. I mean, sure, it did, okay? But you got to remember the people that lived here at the time didn't have any money in the first place. Okay, they weren't invested in the stock market. They weren't margined up to, their neck, borrowing money from banks or whatever it was. That wasn't what they did. I mean, these people were farmers, coal miners, whatever would be. They did whatever it took to maintain life. They I'm not saying life was easy. Don't get me wrong. I mean, these are, talking to some of the people here who have family generations upon generations who've been here. It was a tough life as to how they were raised. Okay. Gee, electricity, running water. They may be, people now may have been the first people in their generation to, or in their family, first generation in their family to ever had it. Okay. So you get that. They weren't living in the lap of luxury or anything like that, but they also weren't living in shanty towns or Hoovervilles or something like this. It wasn't, uh, a couple of pieces of tin tipped up over a couple of scrap 2x4s they found, and that was their house, like it was in the cities. This is kind of where we are in 2022. It's not 1929 yet, but it's probably 1927 or 1928. We're close. Y'all know it. You can feel it. All right. Prices are going up. There's now a war going on in Europe. There's a big split between people, socially, racially, economically, whatever, and that's just getting worse. Okay, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. That sounds like the 1920s too. Okay, even the poor were trying to get rich to get out of their deal. As there was the old comment, you know the world's coming to an end when you're taking stock tips from the kid who's shining your shoes. Okay, that was going on in the 1920s. We've seen that around the U.S. for the last 20 years. I mean, and much more recently, hell, I mean, the whole Reddit deal and GameStop and AMC theaters and all this, or buy crypto, it's like, oh, gee, but I saw it on the internet. Okay, well, the internet is the 2020s version of the 1920s shoeshine boy. But so you look at how the people in the mountains survived. They didn't rely on anything outside. You needed a broom, you made a broom. You needed shoes, you made your shoes. Okay. You needed to eat, you grew your food, or you slaughtered your pig, or you went hunting, or whatever. And that was the way of life. Now, there weren't any fat people, okay, never were, but they didn't starve like the people in the cities did because they had the infrastructure around them. They had land to plant. They had skills to plant. They had skills to hunt. They had skills to fish. Okay. You show me, even 100 years ago, where you're going to be able to plant a garden in New York City. Maybe you'd have an empty lot somewhere, somebody'd have something going, but it sure as hell ain't going to feed everybody in the city. The country folk were able to use their skills and what they had to continue life at, let's say, 75% of normal during the Depression. Okay, things were still tough. Don't get me wrong. But if you grew potatoes and the person next door grew green beans and the person next door had chickens, even in the late 20s and the 30s, there were little flea markets or whatever it is where people would go and they would take their extra potatoes and they would trade them for green beans or trade them for eggs or trade them for chickens or whatever would be, or trade them for blacksmithing services. This is all, I mean, go do a little research in history on how the people in the mountains survived the Great Depression. There's a great channel on YouTube. The guy's name is Donnie Laws, and I'll link his videos down here. He's from my area, okay, and talks a lot about anywhere the 1900s, anywhere from say the 20s to the 50s or 60s and growing. I mean, some of the stuff, it's very enjoyable to watch and learn the history of this area. But these were your survivors, okay? Now, of course, you needed money for something. Back then, you had the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. Okay, those things were brought out by FDR, who brought socialism into the United States. What's that sound like? Okay, how many of these? Look at the Green New Deal. Gee, I don't know who brought up the New Deal. That was FDR, a socialist. Okay. Same types of same type of solutions to the same types of problems. Okay, let's implement socialism, and it works great. So they say. But I want to give you this: if you worked for the CCC or the WPA back in the 30s, okay, this was a job. You were working on dams or bridges or anything, road system, whatever it would be. Government job. Hey, that's what I want. I want a government job. What does that sound like? Okay. You were paid about $30 a month, literally $1 a day. Okay. There weren't weekends. You wanted to take a couple of days off, somebody else took your job. So you worked and worked and worked. You got up before the sun came up. You went to bed when it was pitch black dark outside. So you made $1 a day. Wow, that's good money. But back then, bread was 10 cents a loaf. Can you imagine paying 10% of your daily salary for a loaf of bread? Okay. Milk was 8 cents a quart. Eggs were 7 cents a dozen. All right, so you want a loaf of bread, a quart of milk, and a dozen eggs. Breakfast, okay? Scrambled eggs and a piece of toast. All right, you just paid 25% of your daily wages for the family to eat breakfast. 25%. Do you spend 25% of your weekly wages now? We really don't break it down to days anymore. Do you spend 25% of what you make a week to buy breakfast? How much does lunch cost? How much does dinner cost? This is why it's so important to learn from the past, so we aren't doomed to repeat the past. Remember what happened. After all of this, FDR brought in all his socialist programs, okay? Social Security being the biggest one. But remember what happened in other countries. Germany, for example, went through the Great Depression too, Weimar Republic. What happened? All those people who were young and rich, as Glenn put it, got young and poor. And they're like, I don't like this. Hey, maybe I'll follow this guy Hitler. Might not be German this time, though Olaf Scholz is not exactly what you'd call the screaming conservative. But who's going to be that one this time? Is it going to be Putin? Is it going to be Xi Jinping? Yeah. We're repeating the 1920s, guys. Going into a great economic crash. It's coming. Learn from the past. It might save your life. Pinball out.